Hey, I'm John MacDonald, founder and CEO of The Good, a digital experience optimization firm, and author of Behind the Click. Best advice that I've ever received in business has been that it is better to be in a good business than to be good at business. So, want to make sure that you're in the right business. You can be a genius at running a business, but if you're just pushing that boulder uphill the entire time, you have a really hard time being successful with it.
So, what's a good business, John? How do we know that it's a good business and not just good at business?
Well, I think that there's a push and a pull, right? Is the business pulling you into uncomfortable spots? Meaning, are you being forced to grow? Are you being forced to learn? Are you being forced to, solve uncomfortable problems? Or are you pushing that business uphill where you have to make everything happen? Is it growing only because you're pushing so hard, or are you being pulled into growth? And I think that push versus pull is it's super real, and very just visceral at times as well.
Interesting. That's so interesting. Well, with that, I think that leads us to a good place. You're talking about your book, about
Yeah.
Behind the Click, because this is all about kind of pulling our customer closer to us,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Behind the Click is really all about the psychological principles behind the shortcuts that your customers' brains are taking, and the decisions that they're making as they go through your digital experience. And you're either guiding customers towards a purchase or you're sending them running to your competitor. And that's really what you need to understand as a retailer, anybody in B2B or B2C selling to somebody through digital experience. You have to understand what is going through their head at each step of that journey so that you understand what tactics to deploy, right? I've been doing CRO, conversion rate optimization, for 15 plus years now, which is kind of
That's a
hard to
long
believe that
time.
I started this that long ago, right? And all that work that we've done to optimize conversion rates, the more we realize that to make real lasting gains, you have to pull back way further on that customer experience than just the conversion. And there's many impacts that can happen along that journey before the customer even really thinks about purchasing from you, right? So every element of your website is just going to tell them something about why they should or should not be working with or buying from you. And I, in my previous book, Opting into Optimization, I really got into the how, the tactics of how to optimize, right? The different options you have for optimizing. And I didn't cover a whole lot of the why. And what I found was over the past handful of years, pretty much since COVID, right? There's been a huge influx of brands, especially e-commerce, which had a boom during COVID, who want to optimize for conversion because it's costs more than ever now to advertise. To customer acquisition costs are just sky high. And so all of these brands want to optimize, but they're only optimizing for the conversion, and they're going online and researching how to do this, and they get a ton of checklists, and these checklists give them tactics, but the brands don't understand why or when to deploy these tactics. And that's really why I wanted to write this book, Behind the Click, because I wanted people to understand why they should be taking different tactics. And so that's really what this covers.
Cool. So with that, is it that people don't know or that they're confused about the tactics and the why? Or
Mm.
is it what's the cause that you think they need to know this why?
Well, I think that the challenge is that most brands don't realize that decisions online are not just logical, but they're influenced by psychological factors. And I wanted to bridge that gap between applying psychological principles and improving digital experiences. And so I did a lot of research on what are all of the thoughts that are going through folks' heads while they're at each step of that funnel. And a lot of brands just don't realize that there's a problem, right? They don't really think about it. Um, they maybe they have a low conversion rate or stagnant conversion rate, and they think, oh, that's an issue. That's usually when people call us, right? But they're not looking at things like high bounce volumes off of checkout pages, for instance, or how much time is spent on product detail pages, or all of the different data points that are so measurable now, right? It's you can measure every click and movement on your website. And clearly, if you take a look at those and have an understanding of why those are happening, you can clearly see where the issues are. And so that was really kind of the emphasis behind this.
Right on. So with that, let's talk about one of the examples that you have in the book about this, the
Yeah.
baseball bats. I know that
Yes.
my son plays baseball. He's 8 years old. He
Hmm.
needs a bat, right? And
Okay.
I could spend $30 on a bat, or I could spend $1,000 on a bat. And which one
Mm.
do I need? And I go to a website and I see 100 bats, and I have no idea. It just is more confusing than less. And I end up just buying one at the price point I can afford.
Right. Yeah, so we did a lot of work with Easton Baseball. You may be familiar with
Yep.
them through Little League. They're the major sponsor of the Little League tournament every year, World Series. And what we found was that parents were really confused, just like you said, right? They were going on the website, they were, needed a bat for their kids' Little League game kind of season coming up. And what they would do is they would encounter a wall of bats on the website, and they would all look so similar in the pictures, maybe have a slightly different color scheme, something of that sort, but the price points were wildly different. And what Easton was doing was had all of these great technical innovations, right? They had bats that did things like reducing sting, right? If you use an aluminum bat, which is what Easton sells and Little League allows for, right? Yeah, you hit that ball and it can hurt your hands,
Yep.
right? Especially for a child who's, maybe a little less tolerant to that pain. But what happened is Easton came up with all these great marketing technical terms, right? And instead of just saying it reduces bat sting, right? They would have some fancy marketing campaign behind it and call it a fancy name that nobody knew what it meant except for Easton. So what was happening was they were actually the symptom of all of this was not just lower online sales because parents were confused, but the average order value went way down because just like you, people would go and buy the cheaper bat because they're like, well, I guess they're all the same. What does my kid know in Little League, right? And they were getting a ton of returned bats because what was happening was they would get a call to customer service and they'd say, I bought this bat for my child. And they went to the game and they hit it in batting practice before the game. You warmed up with it. So now the bat has some scuffs on it. It's been used, obviously, right? But they get up to the plate, home plate, to when it's their turn, and the umpire says you can't use that bat. I said, well, why not? And they said because it's not certified for the league you're in, right? There are different divisions within Little League, and you have to have a bat that's certified for each league. And so parents were calling up like, help me out. I just spent $100 on this bat, or often a lot more. As you said, they can get very expensive. And the problem is my kid used it to warm up. So it's got some marks on it. It's not brand new, but I'm not allowed to use it anymore. And I've wasted all this money. So then Easton was having to eat that cost, refurb the bats, try to resell them. It became a whole issue where they were just draining margin all over the place. So what we did is we did a bunch of user research to understand why this was happening and to help parents address what bats should be best for them. So instead of looking at a wall of bats, they could answer a couple of questions. What league is your child in? That should immediately filter it down only to the right bats. So they're certified for that league. And then you might have 6 or 8 options, right? Now, what type of hitter is your child? Are they swinging for the fences? Or are they just trying to get on base, right? Completely different bat needs, right? Different weights, different proportions, different where the weight is in the bat matters a lot. I didn't play Little League, but I learned a lot about this helping out with this, right? And all of this came up in interviewing parents. And they said, all of these questions I have aren't answered on the website. So I'm forced to go into a retail location or make a best guess. And so what was happening was they were having a lot of indecision and information overload, and then having decision fatigue as they're going through each of these, and a severe lack of trust that they were buying the right bat, or that Easton would help them if they didn't buy the right bat. So all of this was coming up, and what we decided to do is just make a quick questionnaire on the website. You fill out these 4 questions, and it supplies you with a very limited number of bats. So it's essentially advanced filtering. But what I did is it really increased. It was a 187% revenue jump just from making it easier to buy from the consumer's perspective, right? Get rid of all the fancy marketing terms, talk about what the benefit is, make it easy to use, and get through that funnel at each stage.
Wow. That's so awesome. I mean, 187%, that's a heck of a leap, man.
Yeah. And it was even way more than that. It was like a 900% or something on mobile, because it was even worse on mobile. You could hardly see what bat you were looking at, right? And you imagine you're scrolling through all these bats. But what we found also was parents were going into their local, like Dick's Sporting Goods, for instance, right? And what they were doing there was looking at all of the bats and had no idea what the technical terms meant, the marketing terms, right? So they would go to Easton's website, and it was no help at all there either. So what they, after fixing up the mobile side of it as well, we were capturing a ton of orders in retail locations, because they would go on Easton's site to check out these technical terms and understand more. And they would go through that filtering process, find the right bat that was for them. The retail location couldn't possibly stock all the different variants, so they would end up buying it on Easton's website right there in the store from their phone. So that just jumped mobile sales as well.
Wow. Well, let's talk about some of the things that people need to see on a website, John. Let's talk about the homepage, because the homepage has got 37 different things that I can click. I want to show off everything. It's my billboard / Chinese food menu. What do I need to determine? What are customers looking for when they come to my homepage?
Yeah, great question. So I think the best way to think about this is there's 4 stages, and I break these stages down in the book in 4 sections that a consumer is going through. And the homepage is really just that first stage, right? So there's the discovery phase, the information gathering, decision making and conversion, and then finally post-purchase, which often gets forgotten about as well, right? You got that purchase, that's all you need, let's move on. But really, in that discovery phase, when people get to your homepage, they are forming their initial impressions, right? It's really just based on whether the company understands their problem and do they have a potential solution, right? Not the customer at this stage doesn't need an answer to that question. They just need a scent trail. Can this company solve my problem, right? Do I think, is it worth taking that next step, right? So when they find your company, they've entered that discovery phase, right? So this is the moment that a potential customer is maybe, has visited from an ad, right? And you need to make sure that language from the ad resonates on the homepage as well. So there's that thread that takes them through this. But this is really laying the groundwork for how a person forms impressions about your brand, how they're going to engage with your company moving forward, and ultimately deciding whether to advance further down that funnel, right? And consumers at this stage are really asking 2 questions. And this is really how you want to guide the content on your page, because that specific content is going to be different based on your brand, your target audience, all of that, right? So the first question consumers are asking here is, does this company understand my problem? Right? Which is what I had mentioned a minute ago. You need to carefully craft that first impression, right? And this is going to create an anchor for that entire digital experience moving forward, right? So you have to get that right. Can you, I don't know how many, Phil, how many sites have you been to that you get there and you're like, I don't understand what this company does.
Yeah, or they're popping up everything all over the place the first time I go there. Like, take 20% off. I'm like, I just want to see your shirts.
Yeah, exactly. And You're like, do you even sell shirts or you just sell discounts?
Right.
Right? Because that's all they're giving you, right? But that second question is, does this company have a solution to my problem? And that's where you're saying, a pop-up offering a discount gets in the way of that,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't answer that question at all. It just kind of gets in the way. But you really need to conduct user testing on your site to have a good understanding of your customers' needs, like we did with Easton. And you can come into that digital journey with them so that you understand what process are they taking, what questions do they have at each step that they're going through in their head, and you can guide them to that right solution using that. So.
Very good. Very good. So what about an about page, John? What are they thinking about on an about page?
Well, the problem is they're thinking about themselves. And I say it's a problem not because they're thinking about themselves, but because brands only want to talk about the brand on the about page, right? So this is, all part of that information gathering phase, right? So if you take a step back, I want to learn more about the brand. Yes, I'm going to go to an about page. But often what we find is consumers go to that about page because they don't have an easy answer to that first two questions on the homepage, right? Again, do they understand my problem, and do they have a solution to that problem? Now, this is where a great founder story can be helpful on an about page. Don't get me wrong, you need to tell people about your company on this page, but you also need to answer questions like, um, what do I need to know about this company before I purchase? Right? You really don't want to leave anything up to interpretation here, and you also want to answer who else has already bought this, right? And if I join them, what does that say about me, right? So you can turn this into kind of a social proof area of the site as well, and say, oh, hey, well, we have these great influencers who are doing great things with our products, and here's some examples of those, right? As opposed to saying, all of the stats about your company and awards you've won, et cetera, that most consumers are going to look at and go like, okay, everyone puts that stuff up there, right? So show them exactly what that purchasing choice does for them and how it's going to help them and what it says about them to other people.
Yeah. Well, you said an interesting word there that I want to dive into a little bit, and that's influencers. What are influencers? What is that? What are people looking for when they see an influencer that they see? Are they looking for common people like you and me, or are they looking for celebrity? I mean, what are they looking for, John?
Well, I think they're looking for, we call that social proof, but at the same time, they're looking for what's in it for them, right? Well, the consumer wants to know, if I buy this product, what is it going to do for me? And does it solve my pain or need, right? Consumers are only at your website for two reasons. And in 15 plus years, promise you, there's only two reasons. You are not Facebook. People are not coming to your site to hang out and kill time, right? They are there for two reasons and two reasons only: to understand, can you solve their pain or need, right? Somebody comes to your site because they have a need or a pain to be resolved. That's the only reason somebody's investing time on your site. The second thing is, if they determine you can solve their pain or need, they want to convert as quickly and easily as possible and get on with their lives, right? Think about anytime you've bought a flight on an airline, right? You the last thing you want to do is spend all day on that site. You are there to get your flight that meets your needs and move on, right? Hopefully before you're interrupted and you forget and have to come back to it and start the process over, right? So the reality here is that you need to make that as smooth of a journey as possible. And influencers are just one piece of that. They can really help you to have a good understanding of what it's going to be like after you convert. And that's really what it should address. And, sometimes you have the wrong influencers align with the product, right? It was recently, a couple months ago now, but like it was a pretty big deal when Snoop Dogg and Solo Stove got together. I don't know if you heard about that. And he said, "Hey, I'm giving up smoke."
Oh yeah.
And yeah, he did this whole thing, and everyone's like, "Oh, he's giving up smoke." But it was a whole ad for Solo Stove in the end, which is a smokeless fire pit. And the problem was that consumers didn't make that connection at all. They just didn't. It wasn't. They weren't thinking about that at all. And he created a whole bunch of like, well, that was a dud. Like that wasn't what I thought he was talking about. And in the end, the CMO gets let go, the CEO gets let go. All these things happen. Solo Stove, unfortunately, because of that, because it just didn't resonate. So you need to make sure you have the right influencers who are answering questions that consumers have. And to say, Solo Stove's big thing is that it is a smokeless fire pit. It's a great product and a great idea. The last thing I want to do is sit out at a fire pit and smell like smoke the next day, So, yeah, I think you have to make sure you're addressing the concerns that people have and telling them what it's going to be like after they purchase.
And does there need to be any backstory on those influencers to understand that they're kind of like me or anything like that?
I think that was another big miss with Snoop Dogg. Was Snoop Dogg doesn't resonate. He don't get me wrong. He's very down to earth in a lot of ways, right? But I also think he's not going to resonate about a barbecue pit, like or a fire pit. It just isn't something that most people would associate those two things with. I actually think you're better off where you have an influencer that people don't know. And by that, I mean somebody who has some good social following, but isn't an international superstar. And, I have a friend who runs a predictive media agency. And in his predictive media agency, he has a tool that they've developed that can pair two influencers together and help you understand which is going to be better for your brand. Okay. Looks at all their followers, the demographics of everybody, pulls all that information together, analyzes it, and tells you which of the two are going to be better. Now, what they have found is in most cases, it's the influencer you haven't heard of that is going to resonate more and actually have the impact with your audience. And I always find that really fascinating because it costs you a lot less as well to work with those unknown or lower profile influencers. Plus, they're going to give you a more real type of experience, right? So, if Snoop Dogg had just posted a video sitting out with the solar stove and his family and being like, "Hey, this is great. I don't smell like smoke." Like, done, right? But that wasn't the angle they took.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. Well, before we wrap up here and I ask you a couple last questions, I want to encourage folks to get a copy of the book. If you want to get a copy of Behind the Click, visit thegood.com/BTC. You can get a copy of the book electronically or otherwise. I've read about 80% of the electronic book, so I've got that. And John's sending me a new one because it got lost in the mail. Otherwise, I'd have that read. But tell me, how do we get started on this journey, John? Obviously, we should buy the book, right, and get started.
Well, buy the book, and if you go to that website, thegood.com/BTC for Behind the Click, and you use code BTC podcast 50, you can get 50% off a digital copy. So just for listening today, if you go do that, BTC podcast 50, and you'll get 50% off a digital copy. So it's the easiest way to get started. But really, if you're looking to optimize your site and make a better user experience digital journey, what I would recommend you do is talk to your consumers. It's the easiest thing you can do. And it's the number one thing we find brands don't do, right? So just spend an hour a week talking to people. Now, there's a couple good ways you can do this. The first is your customer service reps, they're the front line. Look at the tickets. Have a good understanding of what topics keep coming back up. That's how we found out. We talked about Easton and baseball bats. That's how we found out they had these problems. And what we did is we actually made a short survey, 2 questions, that every time a customer service rep got off the phone, they were supposed to fill out that form. And then we started finding that there were similarities. We kept hearing recurring themes. I need to return my bat. It's not the right bat for the league, right? You start hearing these different things. What does this technology mean? And just, really quick, to ask the rep to take 2 minutes, fill out what was the topic about. It could be a drop down, something of that sort, where you have a bunch of options, but then a 1 sentence summary of what was the main question that was asked. You don't have to get into what the solution was, et cetera. Just what was the main question that was asked. And if you do that, you're going to have a kind of this great lifeline into what consumers are asking, what questions aren't being resolved by your website. Because the last thing anybody wants to do these days is have to pick up the phone and call customer support, right? Nobody wants to do that. So I think that's a really great method for getting insight into your consumers. Second best method, just talk to them. Just, go out, find people who match your ideal customer profile, have them walk through your site, and ask them to talk out loud about the experience that they're having. What that's going to do is have you understand what questions they have, where they're having roadblocks, where they can't find the answers to the information they want. And that's going to give you just such a great place to start.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, get to know John McDonald more. Go to thegood.com, get a copy of his book at thegood.com/BTC, and use the code BTC for Behind the Click, podcast 50, to get 50% off the electronic version. Thank you so much, John. This has been really helpful. I appreciate you.
Awesome. Thanks for